This week's book review with Nevil Gibson is Why Governments Get It Wrong and How They Can Get It Right. Now that sounds like topical reading for politicians as well as those that criticise them.
Well, I guess I'm in the latter category. I certainly jumped on this book when it arrived. It's a good, easy read. It's around about 200 pages, a few notes, and it's well written by an academic who's done a lot of studies before, but this is the first time written for a public, general public, and it's based on a lot of case studies about decisions, all of which we will be familiar with. I mean, they're obviously taken from the authors based in England, so they come from mainly the English-speaking world, ones we're familiar with, including COVID and so on. And I certainly read it with the local government elections in mind and what might happen next year.
Tell us a bit about the author and why he's qualified to give us this advice.
Yeah, Dennis Gruber, he grew up in Tasmania and his first job was working in the Tasmanian Parliament. I'm not sure which side he was working for, but he was writing speeches and so on. So he had experience inside government, how it works and that sort of thing. And he's now at the University of Cambridge running a public policy institute. By the photograph, he looks relatively young. And he says in the book that a lot of the ideas he's got in the case studies came from discussing how governments get it right and when they get it wrong with his students. And he's come up with a plan that involves a pretty simple one. You get your ducks in a row. In his case, it's a simple 4-step plan.
So it's about lining up 4 ducks in a row. How is this achieved?
Well, you start off by defining whether you've got a problem to solve before you start developing policies for it. So then you start building a story. The popular word, of course, is narrative. I don't like it myself. You build a bit of a story about why this problem needs to be solved. And then you look at the data, the evidence, and is there enough to keep this going forward? Now, you've got an example he gives of the Trump's wall across the border with Mexico, the concrete wall. He pretty much lined up those first 3 ducks. But the 4th duck is implementation, and that's where it failed because the concrete wall wasn't really the solution to that particular problem.
So what sort of examples is he giving, apart from Trump's wall, about where governments are getting it wrong?
Well, an interesting one for local readers because he doesn't mention New Zealand very much apart from electoral reform, the choosing of an electoral thing. In Canada, they've had a number of referendums. There's a big push to get proportional representation, but Canadian voters say, hey, there's no problem here. We're quite happy with the way things go, and so there's no pressure for change. He looks closely at COVID as well, and New Zealand is one of the 3 examples, and we're pretty familiar one. There was a Swedish one where they said we're not going to do any restrictions or lockdowns at all. You had the Brazil where they went even further, and New Zealand which had immediate lockdowns and then had continuing ones. And in each of these cases, the government they got some of the ducks lined up right at the start or at the end. Sweden, for example, the evidence was coming through that the not having any restrictions wasn't working. The death toll kept going up. In Brazil, the same sort of thing happened. In New Zealand, it was the opposite way round. We did an effective lockdown on the elimination policy, but once it was obvious that the vaccinations and that sort of thing worked, we probably left it too long to come out of it. So that's what I read from the book anyway.
He also gives some examples of where governments have got it right. What are some of the successes?
Yeah, here again, he's weighing up decisions based on evidence and economic impact. Now, one that didn't work was the Danish fat tax, but smoking did. And the buy-in there is you got the public along with you. And one of the key things he has about smoking, apart from the evidence on that on health and that sort of thing, is that the people who smoke were seen as victims. They weren't demonised, and so you were victims of the addiction, and the public opinion could be swung against the makers of the cigarettes. And so all around the world, you've now got virtually nobody can smoke in certain places. And New Zealand, well, if the law on selling cigarettes to people of certain ages keeps going up, it'll be banned altogether, but it won't be a ban like they did with alcohol in the United States, which didn't work.
Now, on balance, do you think the book will be read widely enough to make any difference?
Well, I hope it does, because it is an easy book to read. It only takes a couple of hours. It's got lots of examples, and you can actually look into daily examples, like one would be, is there really a problem to solve with the government on Three Waters, the merging of Television New Zealand and Radio New Zealand, the merger of the polytechnics, that sort of thing. And you say, well, is there really a problem there to solve, or are they being driven by other reasons? And you might get the first duck that you think it's a good idea, but is it really a problem to solve? And I think that's where people might look more critically at what governments do. And if you're on the other side and implementing this sort of thing, well, unless you've got the three ducks lined up and then you start implementing, you better, there's plenty of lessons to learn there.
Nevil, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.